Hi, Rashonda Cade here. We are reading Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins. We are on what chapter are we on? Chapter 26. Let's dive into it. Do you hear that? I have some weird static. I guess we're okay. The evening of the eventful day that made Jewel, Cuthbert Sumner's wife, closed in heavy and somber. The hearing had the expected ending, and Sumner was held for trial in the following September before the grand jury for a willful murder. The evidence was circumstantial, but damaging in the extreme. It showed exclusive opportunity for reasons unknown, but it was whispered about town that the girl had been an unwedded mother. Added to this was the knowledge of the broken engagement between the prisoner and Miss Bowen, and the fact that Miss Madison had at one time been affianced to him, and it was expected that she would be called by the prosecution to show the fickle nature of his relations with women. At 7 o'clock in the evening of that same day, robed in black velvet, Jewel paced restlessly up and down the floor of the library, sometimes pausing to listen to sounds from without, sometimes approaching the window and trying to pierce the gloom. The dinner bell rang, for no matter what our griefs or how dark the tragedies which are enacted about us, meals are still served and eaten, just as if the hearts assembled about the board were never wrenched nor broken. The points brought out in the evidence were soon making their way about the city, and excitement and interest grew momentarily. Sumner smiled in bitterness of heart. He hardly knew himself in the picture drawn. Jewel sat in an obscure corner of the audience room of the court, heavily veiled, and listened to the testimony with a heart bursting with indignation. Each moment the load at her heart grew heavier. They both realized at last that this was no child's play, but a struggle to the death. Sumner clenched his hands and registered a vow to spend his fortune if necessary to clear his name. For the sake of the dear incentive, the thought of whom warmed his heart and made him bold to meet impending disaster. And so that just means for the sake of his brand new wife, he'll go broke to prove his innocence. The two ladies took their accustomed places at table, each secretly regretting the absence of the senator. So Jewel and her mom. With him at home, dinner was wont to be a festive meal where laughter and wit cheered the household or chance visitor. A dismal air hung over the room now. The servants moved to and fro with unaccustomed solemnity. The mother and daughter addressed each other seldom. Each was buried in her own thoughts. Presently, both rose from the table and passed into the library where coffee was served. After the servants had retired and they were safe from intrusion, Mrs. Bowen broke the silence that brooded over them. She watched Jewel closely all through the meal, studying her looks, thinking over her words, and striving to arrive at satisfactory conclusions. At length, she said quietly, "Now, my dear, you have told me next to nothing, nor have I asked, seeing how pale and tired you are, but I must talk with you about this marriage. I fear you have been very rash. My dear, I positively dread your father's return. Dearly as he loves you, he will be very angry." After a pause, she continued, clasping and unclasping her fingers nervously. Nervously. "Oh, the talk there will be when this affair is known. Why didn't you consult me, child? I could have devised some way of helping the poor fellow without requiring you to sacrifice yourself. I am disappointed in Cuthbert Sumner." "Do not use the word sacrifice, mamma. I am glad to have the right to stand by Cuthbert in this dark hour. And why say anything to you of our intention? No one can blame you now. Beside, we have agreed to say nothing at present about the marriage." "But your whole life will be spoiled if he is found guilty." "Mother," said the girl, sinking on her knees by Mrs. Bowen's side, "don't despair. It will all come out right in a little while. I am sure it will. And you have always called yourself his friend, even when I was against him. You cannot believe him guilty. You are too just in your judgment, mamma." Jewel was kneeling in the full light of the glowing fire. The ruddy glare fell on her white face, and the plaits of bright hair wound closely around her small head. Mrs. Bowen sighed as she gazed in admiration at her daughter. The great gray eyes glowed like diamonds, but there was a world of passionate anguish in their depths. The flower-like mouth was compressed with the intensity of the pain which filled her breast. Again, Mrs. Bowen sighed and moved uneasily in her seat. "Yes, but this is different. A man accused of murder." "How so, mamma? Is friendship and sunshine so different from friendship and shade?" There was sarcasm on the delicately chiseled features. "What a champion you are, Jewel. Once, perhaps, I should have acted and felt as you do." "But now, mamma?" Now, my child, I am of the world, worldly. Do you think Papa will be very angry? Asked the girl with trembling lips after a short silence. We can expect nothing less. He is too fond of you to hold his anger long, however. I shall stand with you, Jewel, if it is any comfort for you to know it. I am glad, glad, glad that you cannot marry General Benson. Jewel marveled much at the strange look on her mother's face as she uttered these words. My dear mamma! And the two women embraced each other. Then followed another silence broken by the elder woman. What impression did you receive from the evidence? I mean, apart from the conclusions drawn by the jury. A quiver went through the girl as she replied, I was confirmed in my belief in his innocence, although everything seemed to point the other way. Aurelia Madison's evidence was against him. She gave the impression that he came and went at her beck and call. She is false to the core, a dangerous woman. I agree with you, Mamma, but her beauty blinds men. I dread her influence on the jury. There is no soul there, nothing but sensuality. And let's add that it's a jury that's only men because at this time women weren't allowed to serve on juries. Soul, there is no need for soul in a woman's beauty for it to dazzle most men, was the bitter answer. I marvel much over the matter. It seems to me there is something incomplete in the case, something to be explained. That poor girl, I can see no reason for murdering her. She may have been killed by mistake. That is scarcely likely. Cases of mistaken identity are common enough. It's a mysterious affair. I hope it may be cleared up without any delay. I hope so, added Jewel. Murder will out. There lies my hope for our success in tracing the murderer. What does Mr. Henson say? Not much. We have had no time to talk. He has hardly got to work yet, but he told me to keep my courage up and that he thought he should be able to throw some light on the dark points of the story. He has talked with Cuthbert. Before Mrs. Bowen had time to reply, the lace and satin portiere was pushed aside and Venus advanced toward them with a solemn and awe-stricken face. What is it, Venus? Asked Mrs. Bowen, regarding her with surprise. Please, Mrs. Bowen, she said hesitatingly. Senator Bowen. Oh, Papa is come, cried Jewel in delight. No, Miss. At this point, General Benson's well-known figure appeared in the entrance. Mrs. Bowen, Jewel, he exclaimed as he hurried toward them. I am the bearer of evil tidings. Senator Bowen was taken ill in New York, and we have hastened to bring him home as soon as it was possible to move him. Have a room prepared instantly. The ambulance will arrive almost immediately. Well, of course, Senator Bowen is sick now. I'm surprised he's not dead. I mean, I say that cavalierly, but before another hour had elapsed, the great hush, which is the shadow of the grim visitant, whom no earthly power may shut out, had fallen on the Bowen mansion. Aw, that's so sad. He's about to die. The servants walked with noiseless tread and spoke in whispers. Senator Bowen was ill until death. He had been suddenly stricken down by a shock. I wonder what the shock was. The Washington delegation had been tendered a banquet at a famous New York club, and a hilarious time had been enjoyed. The New Yorkers had outdone themselves in catering for the amusement of their guests. Senator Bowman had enjoyed himself hugely. Along in the early morning hours, the servant passing the door of his room had caught the sound of someone struggling for breath within. Entering, he beheld the senator lying on the bed, one hand pressed to his heart, the other hanging inert. His eyes were wild, his pale countenance lined with purple marks. Okay, so I'm assuming we're supposed to be believing he had a heart attack. Clearly, I am skeptical. The man went for help, and soon medical aid had rendered all the relief possible. As soon as he could make himself understood, the stricken man urged them to take him home. After the first burst of grief, Mrs. Bowen and Jewel took up their places in the sick room along with the trained nurses. Each looked at the other in awe and consternation over the awful suddenness of this event. Surprising events had followed one another rapidly the past few days. I'll say. They dared not think of the next cruel blow that fate might deal them. The doctors and nurses came and went softly. The hours drew out their long, anxious length. At the close of the third day, the sick man fell into a heavy stupor from which the doctor said he might rally, probably would, and he might linger 2 or 3 days longer, but the end was inevitable. Should he rally, he must be kept quiet and on no account excited. His heart was weak. Mrs. Bowen undertook to see these instructions carried out. Jewel, pale and distressed, shared her mother's watch. She was in agony. Her love for her father was strong, deep, and tender. She was his idol, and he was hers. And until she met Cuthbert Sumner, she had always felt that if he died, she should not care to live another hour. She could never remember his having been cross to her in his whole life. In her eyes, his very faults were virtues. Wow, talk about being a daddy's girl. At midnight, Mrs. Bowen persuaded her daughter to go and lie down. Keep your strength, my child. There is much to go through. If your father wakes, I will surely call you. When alone, she drew her chair to the fire and sat there in shadow, watching the face of the silent figure on the bed that looked so ghastly in the light of the shaded light. It was very still. The tired nurses in the next room dozed. Events long past returned in full force and pictured themselves vividly before her inner senses. How kind this man had been to her, how much she owed to his love and care. Those are two interesting phrases. How kind this man had been to her, how much she owed to his love and care, which takes us back to, who is Mrs. Bowen? And now the hour had come for her to lose a protector who had never failed her. Wealth she might have, but it would not supply the tender deference and loving solicitude of wedded life that had been hers. She shuddered at her thoughts. Why did the past haunt her so persistently? Presently, she found herself weeping softly. There are brave natures, women's perhaps, more often than men's, which bear up in a sea of adversity and present a bold front to the buffeting winds of life's uncertainties. And sometimes these brave natures find, I think that should say find, but it says fine. And sometimes these brave natures find a safe haven for their frail barks. Mrs. Bowen was one of these. She had never known trouble save by name since she met Zenas Bowen some 20 years before. Wow, that's nice. And now behold, she is confronted by a very tempest of sorrow. In the midst of her reverie, she was startled to hear her own name pronounced. Estelle. It was Senator Bowen who spoke. In an instant, his wife was at his side. Dear Zenas, are you better? She said cheerfully. Yes, my brain is clear. I have been watching you, Estelle. Where is Jewel? In her room. I made her lie down. Do you want her? Poor child. Let her sleep. His eyes roved restlessly about the familiar room. It is good to be at home. So good. Yes, but you must not talk. Drink this and sleep. She held a soothing draught to his lips, lifting the powerless head in her arms with all a mother's tenderness. He drank it obediently and then lay back on his pillow, and a satisfied look of peaceful rest overspread his pale features. He held his wife's hand in a nerveless grasp. We have been happy, Estelle. You have been a perfect wife. I have left you well provided for. Them rascals got some of it, but not the whole of it by a darn sight. Zenas ain't such a fool as he seems. A gleam of his old fun-loving spirit was on the pain-worn face. If Jewel marries the general, no, Zenas, she interrupted. Then she stopped, remembering the doctor's caution. But the sick man did not grasp the significance of her words. His mind wandered. No, you don't, General. My little girl shan't be forced. I, her father, say it. When, where, and who she likes. That's my idea. I tell you no. Then he looked at his wife with fast glazing eyes and said, the little hair trunk, tell her, no difference, just the same. I wonder what that means. The little hair trunk is a trunk of some sort. Tell her, I'm assuming is Jewel, no difference. Maybe no difference between a biological daughter and whatever Jewel is to him. I don't know. Just the same. I am merely guessing. I imagine it will be revealed later. Feebly, he raised his arm. His wife knew his desire. She placed it about her neck. Then he drew her head nearer. A soft light radiated his features. My faithful wife, he whispered. The cold lips touched her cheek. Zenas, Zenas, exclaimed Estelle with a burst of emotion as she kissed the chill brow. There was one long-drawn breath. The distracted wife sprang to the bell and rang a peal that brought the nurses hurrying in. Senator Bowen is worse, she cried, wringing her hands helplessly. The head nurse bent over the bed, then rising said, Senator Bowen is dead, madam. Again, Washington society was stirred by an unexpected calamity among its leading people. Interest was heightened because of the close association which existed between the Bowens and the chief actor in the Bradford tragedy. The ill-starred trip of the delegation that had started so gaily on its Canadian mission was the talk of the capital. And that ends chapter 26 of Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins. I'm Rashonda Cade. Until next time.